This was the night he'd long dreamed of, the night Nick Griffin walked on stage to be treated like any other politician, to debate with opponents who used to refuse even to share a platform with him.
Welcome to Question Time.
The BBC's invitation for Griffin to go on Question Time followed his election as a Euro MP. It has raised such fury because he is no ordinary politician. He leads a whites-only party which inspires widespread fear and hatred.
I've been relentlessly attacked and demonised over the last few days, and the fact is that my father was in the RAF during the Second World War. I am not a Nazi. I never have been.
It was the BNP leader's past comments about the Nazis' mass killing of Jews which first caused him to struggle.
So Winston Churchill put everything on the line so that my ancestors wouldn't get, slaughtered in the concentration camps. But here sits a man who says that that's a myth, just like a flat world was a myth. How could you say that? How could you?
I cannot explain why I used to say those things. I can't tell you... any more than I can tell you why I've changed my mind. I can't tell you the extent to which I changed my mind, because European law...
This is rubbish.
Because European law prevents...
There is no law here that stops
absolutely.
you explaining yourself.
We had this in the 1930s against the Jews, the 1960s against the blacks, and now Nick Griffin's playing the same old game, hatred and fear peddling. Hatred and fear against a minority that actually has to defend itself. And I think that's outrageous. It's completely against the traditions of this country.
Those who hoped for or feared a punch-up were to be disappointed. As panel and audience lined up to remind Griffin of his past views, he claimed he and his party had changed.
Because I have brought the British National Party from being, frankly, an anti-Semitic and racist organisation into being the only political party which, in the... clashes between Israel and Gaza, stood full square behind Israel's right to deal with Hamas terrorists.
His and his party's views on stopping immigration were, he insisted, supported by 80% of voters. Islam was, he said, incompatible with Britain. But...
the indigenous British, the people who've been here...
The whites.
That's it. The skin colour's irrelevant, Jack. Skin colour's irrelevant.
What do you mean by white, Mr. Griffin? Indigenous?
I think
white.
One member of the audience suggested he should be consigned to the colourless landscape of the South Pole.
You're committed to stemming the flow and reversing the flow of immigration into the UK so that we revert back to a white Britain. Where do you want me to go? This is my country. I love this country. I'm part of this country.
I'm very happy for you to stay here. What we've said is that we believe that it's time to shut the door because this country is overcrowded, that criminals, bogus asylum seekers and people who aren't loyal to this country should be deported, and everyone else can stay.
At the end of a programme almost exclusively about Nick Griffin's views, the panel were asked whether this was an early Christmas present for the BNP. He certainly hoped so. The demonstrators outside and many others besides will be hoping that what was unwrapped were his real views. Nick Robinson, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the protests against Nick Griffin outside BBC Television Centre ended a short time ago. Scotland Yard says several officers have been injured in the demonstrations and they've made a handful of arrests. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford reports now on the protesters and the focus of their anger, the BNP leader Nick Griffin.
As Question Time was being recorded, the furious anti-fascists continued to press on the perimeter of the BBC. The police came close to losing control of the main gate several times. And as the evening wore on, officers were deployed in their riot gear. Some rage was directed at the BBC, but most at the BNP leader, Nick Griffin.
The protesters are so angry because they don't regard Nick Griffin as being an ordinary politician. They see him as being a man with a National Front past and a political inheritance that goes right back to the Nazis.
Would the BBC have had Adolf Hitler on the television 2 years before the Second World War if there'd been television there? No, they wouldn't.
From what I know, if the BNP get more power, then I'll be sent to Jamaica, which isn't my home. I was born here, I live here, I work here, I go to school here. I think I have a right to be here.
Nick Griffin admits to playing a leading role in the National Front in the 1970s and 80s. In the late 1990s, he was convicted of distributing material likely to incite racial hatred, but is now more careful in his public statements. All the same, he is on the record as saying that the ultimate aim for me and for the BNP still remains an all-white Britain. He says he has nothing against non-whites, but has described Britain as a multiracial hellhole. And although he now says Hitler was wrong, he once said about the Holocaust that orthodox opinion is that 6 million Jews were gassed and cremated. Orthodox opinion also once held that the world is flat. But without a formal ban on the BNP and with the party polling 6% in the European elections, the BBC felt he should be allowed an occasional slot on Question Time.
It would have been quite wrong for the BBC to have said, yes, you are allowed to stand in elections, yes, you've got a level of support that now meets the threshold, but the BBC doesn't think that you should be on. We have no views on the politics or the political leaders. What we do hold absolutely dear is that due impartiality is a value we uphold, and that's why Mr. Griffin was on tonight.
Once the programme recording was over, the crowd did eventually disperse, still furious at the BNP's first appearance on Question Time. Daniel Sanford, BBC News at Television Centre.
Let's talk to our political editor, Nick Robinson, who's at Westminster now. I mean, Nick, this appearance of the leader of the British National Party on Question Time tonight, how significant a moment is this in British politics?
Well, there's no doubt it's a very, very big moment indeed, Fiona. This is undreamt of exposure for Nick Griffin and for the BNP, and his dream really is that it will help move him from the margins to the mainstream. That, of course, is the fear of those demonstrators, that he may well be proved right, and exposure does help politicians. It always has. On the other hand, of course, exposure works both ways. He has had the chance to put over his views on immigration, which may win some support. But he's also been given the chance to deny that he is a Holocaust denier, to simply confirm that he thinks that the Nazis did kill millions of Jews. He failed to do that tonight, and bizarrely, he did, however, say that he thought that the indigenous people of Britain had been victims of what he called a genocide in recent months. Now, of course, no TV programme gives a politician power. It is voters. They choose whether to vote for him, whether to stay at home and make it easier for him to get support. And in the end, what we've discovered in recent years is that the vote that goes to minority parties is less about them and more about whether people believe that mainstream parties are listening to their concerns. That may well be the test of tonight, not what Mr. Griffin had to say.
Nick Robinson at Westminster, thank you. And you can watch Question Time here on BBC One after the news at 10:35. For viewers in Wales, it's on at 11:05.